Hi, I'm Dr. Carol Lewis. I'm a clinical psychologist and public health practitioner. I work with the University of Florida's Mobile Outreach Clinic. I've been a practicing psychologist for more than 38 years. For 20 years, I worked in the outpatient department of our university's psychiatric hospital. And for 8 years after that, I was a faculty member at the University of Florida Department of Psychiatry. So today I'm going to present to you the Community Wellbeing Mentor Training. And this training is designed to teach some basic mental health tools and skills that are relevant for all human beings. And after being trained as a community well-being mentor, the hope is that these tools and skills will be useful for all of the people being trained, as well as giving those mentors tools and skills to teach to other people in their communities, whatever their communities may be. And so we're going to go through the pages of the manual. And if you would like a physical manual, you are welcome to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. Or if you have other comments or questions, again, feel free to reach out to me at this email or cell phone number. So we're going to go over all of the materials just like you would in an in-person training. And so this page tells us what this project is, but let's go to a slide that has it here in perhaps a little in a bigger fashion. So the Community Wellbeing Mentor Project grew out of the idea that a lot of what someone such as myself, a clinical psychologist, teaches people or helps people learn in our individual or group therapy settings, often that a lot of that material could be taught earlier and also to community members who could teach it to other community members. And I've often felt through the years that I wished the person I was working with had been able to learn these things earlier, and have felt like we in mental health need to do a better job at getting these tools and skills out into the community. There also are some projects around the world that have a task shifting model that take the tools and skills and concepts from the professionals, teaching them to other community members who can teach them in their communities. One of them is called the Friendship Bench from Zimbabwe and Africa, where a psychiatrist recruited grandmothers to sit on benches, train them in some evidence-based protocols, some brief tools and skills, and then they taught this to other community members very effectively. In places that have national health services, there's often more of an emphasis on prevention and early intervention. There's watchful waiting, population screening. We don't have that here in the US. And so this is the idea of taking tools and skills out there rather than waiting until people are distressed enough and have the resources to find themselves to a mental health professional. We also know that there's a shortage of mental health professionals across the US. And in our training, you would get a pin similar to all of the circles you see in this training that says Community Wellbeing Mentor, and a certificate. And so if that's something that you're interested in, also please contact me as well. And so in this training, we're going to go over some basic tools and skills, and then some extras. So there's some things that I feel like are really important that everyone should hear. And then there's some other things that might be less relevant, perhaps not relevant for some people at a given point in time, but we might hear or see the need for as community well-being mentors at some point in time. So I've sort of organized things in that way. If one were in an in-person training, you would get a folder or a manual, and in that manual, There are all of the things that we're seeing, which is the content, and then extra copies of everything so that you have those to give out. I'm happy to give you the electronic files and you can make changes in them, continue to make copies, etc. There are also some cardstock teaching tools because there are things that I feel like one might use all of the time or quite often. So I've given you those in cardstock in the folder or the manual. Again, if those are things that you're interested in, please feel free to reach out to me. And so let's look at the basics, community well-being mentor basics. And here, this is what the pen looks like. And so here's a question. How do I know how I feel? And so in mental health, we might say, well, of course, it's in the emotions over here. Those are feelings. But really, I think it's an open question because is a feeling a sensation in our bodies? Is it a thought? I feel like I want to go to the store. Well, that's probably a thought. And so we know that even when we screen for depression and anxiety, and in my clinic, often we've used some screening tools called the PHQ. We use the 9-item version and the GAD-7. Those are open sourced and used around the world. But those tools and skills map pretty directly onto diagnoses of depression and anxiety. And so of those 16 items, again, we're using it to diagnose depression and anxiety. Only 3 of them directly reference mood. The other 13 are about thoughts, body sensations, and behavior. You can see how each of these domains of awareness or areas of awareness are related to the others. I might have a thought, then my body might start to react. I might have a behavior, let's say an avoidance behavior, and at some point I might interpret the whole constellation as an emotion. We have habits in each of these. That's what's most likely to show up, how we've already been reacting over time. But the good news is that at any point in time, we can slow ourselves down, we can have an awareness, and we can build new habits and patterns at any point in time. So we'll keep that in mind. And also remember this, the oval of body sensations. So here's something called a resilience plan. And so this is, again, one of our tools and skills. And so you can grab these actually. Well, if you get the PowerPoint from me, you can grab them right off the PowerPoint, or I'm happy to send you the slides. But we might ask ourselves, what are the early warning signs of difficulty in each of those 4 areas we looked at? So the early warning signs of difficulty, whether it's anxiety or sadness or anger or something else. And so we're going to look in those 4 areas: early warning signs in my body, in my mind or thinking, in my behavior, and lastly, in the emotions, which is, as I've mentioned, vague and really made up of the others. So we're looking for early warning signs, and then for any of the early warning signs, we want to develop a healthy action to take to address it, whatever it may be. If my heart starts pounding and my breathing gets more rapid, for instance, I might begin some focused or slow, deep rhythmic breathing practices. So even just 1 or 2 slow, deep rhythmic breaths. Actually, I'll invite you to that now. So imagining that we're breathing in calm, breathing out tension, exhale longer than the inhale, breathing in calm, breathing out tension. If the exhale is longer than the inhale, it stimulates the soothing part of the nervous system. I might invite you also to notice your feet on the floor or wherever they're resting or in space. And so that is grounding. Actually, the focused breathing is also, but bringing our mind from our round and round thoughts into the body, either at the breath or noticing our feet on the floor. There are other things we can do for that. But any of the early warning signs and any of the areas we want to also have healthy actions to take for each of those. We want a few of those at least to be portable. So if I'm going to, for whatever I'm experiencing as early warning signs, if I'm going to bake bread or play a musical instrument, that's wonderful as long as I have all of the materials and I'm in a place where I can do those things. But if I'm on the bus or I'm out and about and I don't have those, I need something portable. So I might have a mint in my pocket or my backpack, and I might put the mint in my mouth and notice the smell, the taste, the texture, the sensation. And so that can help me take my mind from this round and round thought back into the body and into the present moment. So here's a resilience plan. This is called a feelings or emotions wheel. And it's, I know it's very small on the screen here, so I'm hoping you can see it in a larger format. But really, the concept is that we have the capacity for a whole range of emotions. And many of us only focus on one or two. We perhaps don't have an awareness or the experience to distinguish between emotions. And so it's really important to bring our awareness to what our experience is and have some way to communicate with ourselves and others about our experience. So there are a whole bunch of different emotions. So here is something called the zone of well-being. You might also see a similar sort of concept in from the work of Peter Levine at the somatic experiencing, talking about the window of tolerance, or it's sometimes called the resilient zone from the Trauma Resource Institute. But this is a concept that's been around a long time, and it really, if we can think of that four areas of awareness and the body sensations, this brings our experience and our awareness into the body, what is happening here. And so when things are going pretty well in our zone of well-being, again, this is in the nervous system and in the body systems. We might notice when we're getting activated in our bodies, perhaps heart racing and pounding or breathing more rapid. We may have, hopefully, if we're doing well, have tools and skills to keep us in our zone of well-being rather than shooting off up here into the high zone, fight or flight, high arousal. This is a survival response, as is low arousal, which we might experience as freezing or sort of that paralyzed idea, or fawning, which is sort of capitulating to whatever someone else is requesting or needing, even if it's not in our best interest to really just make the threat go away. So high arousal, fight or flight response, low arousal, freeze or fawn. These are universal within human beings, and they are, again, are survival responses. So they should not go off very often or last very long. They should be like fire alarms, really. So we should not live up here in high arousal or down here in low arousal. Anxiety is up here. And if you think of anxiety, it's heart often experiences heart racing and pounding, that rapid breathing. That's to get the oxygen in, pump it to the arms and the legs for the fighting or the running. Let's say a bear's run into the room, so we need to right then, without a lot of insight-oriented thought, react and respond to survive. Again, that should not come up very often. So we might, in fight or flight, our body might be sweating. That's to cool the body for the fighting or the running. Metabolism gets pulled away from digestion because we don't need to be digesting if we're fighting or running. But again, it's a survival response of our nervous system, and we do not want to be living up here. So if you are experiencing those things in your body, I would suggest we want to notice that and then have some ways to downshift and come back into this zone of well-being. That response to fight or flight is for a physical emergency happening in this moment right in front of us, not for a memory or of of some sort of threat or trauma or an expectation of something that might or might not happen. It's what our body needs to do if there's a physical emergency happening right now in this moment. So this is the zone of well-being in the body. And this is life happening. And so life happens, a trigger occurs. This trigger could be a trauma, a stressor, it could be a grief, it could be a lot of different things, but something happening right in this moment, could be an annoyance. But here, and it could be a thought, it could be something internal or external. So this could be lots of different things. And so then the trigger occurs. Our nervous system, which is trying to keep us safe, may respond with that fight or flight response. So we might get thrown out of our zone of well-being into this high zone, where we may experience this as anxiety or irritability. We might get thrown into the low zone, where we might experience this as sadness, depression, fatigue. We may isolate. All people, this is an all human being concept and experience, but all people get thrown out of their zone of well-being sometimes, but it's a problem if it happens too easily, too frequently. We go too high or too low and get stuck there. So these concepts are just important for us to understand as we learn what is happening in our bodies, in our nervous systems, in our minds, and then have the tools and skills to effectively manage them. We're not trying to control. I believe that's an illusion, and it sets us up for failure. What we are trying to do is develop awareness and the ability to manage or regulate what is happening within us. This is not in the manual. This is just an additional, really, it's a whole set of science at this point in time. But here's an idea called adverse childhood experiences. And there's a science around this. It's been developed for the last 30 years. And the science of ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, tells us that when we experience abuse, neglect, or family dysfunction in our developmental years, our nervous system wires up to keep us safe. So our nervous system, to keep us safe, may fire off, as we talked about, too easily, too frequently, and we may live in that activated state for our survival. If the science tells us that if we experience adversity in our childhood, we get then, which, let me just say, those ACEs were originally measured as 10 different experiences. And in the original work, you could get a score of 0 to 10. So if you had if you had one experience in a category, and there were 10 categories, or there are 10 categories, if you had one experience or multiple experiences in that category, you'd get a score of 1. So they measured the ACEs as 0 to 10. But the more of those adverse childhood experiences you had in your developmental years, the more likely it was many years later, even if those things aren't happening anymore, it increases the probability that later on in your adulthood you'll experience disease, chronic illness in particular, but disease, disability, social problems, and early death. So adversity in childhood leading to disrupted neurodevelopment, then some social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, increased risk of adoption of health risk behaviors. And there's some science to tell us, because we might think, well, then that's what causes it. If I've experienced this adversity in my childhood and now I'm drinking or having substance use and not exercising and eating poorly, etc., that's what leads to the disease later in life and increased risk of early death. But even when that's controlled for, or we eliminate that as a possibility, we still find that the more of this adversity in childhood one has, the greater risk there is for a whole host of chronic illnesses later on and early death. And so those illnesses are mental health illnesses. Some of them but many of them straight on physical illness like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, etc. So there's a whole science around this. You can find information easily, but especially at the CDC website. And also important to know that people who have six or more of those 10 categories in their childhood died or at risk for 20 years life lost. We also know there's intergenerational transmission of adversity as well. So this is just important to know. And it's not determinate. It's not that if this happens, this definitely will occur. But as we know this and understand it, we can then take steps to change our reactivity, for instance. So we're not living in that high arousal zone, which is a reflection. That high arousal is a reflection of elevated stress hormones in the body. And remember, we only need that if there's a physical emergency happening right now. If there's no physical emergency, I don't need my heart pounding and racing, etc. And the cost of having elevated stress hormones too much of the time is the disease, etc., setting us up for that. There's an increasing amount of science to show how does living with elevated stress hormones over time lead to chronic illness. Our bodies are meant for that to be, as I mentioned earlier, like a fire alarm, that systems to be able to help us when we need it, but not to be firing off all of the time. All right. And so the original ACEs or adverse child experiences pyramid started right here with the ACEs themselves, but now the science has expanded to look at social conditions, local context. This could be things like poverty, not having enough food, various other things like that. And then here we have generational embodiment or historical trauma, which could also be someone's lived experience such that their nervous system is firing off too much of the time and hurting them. And sometimes I refer to that as the stress tax. So if we're living in this place up here of elevated stress hormones, we are being set up for increased risk of chronic illness. And it may not show up for a long time, but that could be the result also of social contexts as well. All right, that's ACEs. And so our first and most basic tool is the 6 steps to emotional health. And if you have these materials in a physical format, this is usually made as a blue card half sheet on cardstock. But really, how do we begin to manage mood and anxiety effectively? It starts in the body. So 2 of the most important targets for the treatment of depression and anxiety overall are healthy lifestyle habits, which we're going to cover right here, and also learning how to relate to or manage our thoughts in a healthier fashion without being swept away or hijacked by them. Just because we have a thought doesn't make it true or real or the time to think about it. So these are skills and tools, which is why we're talking about them and learning them. We can get better and more effective with all of these tools and skills with practice. And we have those habits and patterns, as I mentioned earlier, that we're already doing. Some of them serve us well, others do not serve us that well. So our emotional health really starts in the body. So the first of these 6 steps to emotional health, and not to say this is a determinate list and there aren't others, but these are the first 6 we'll look at, is sleep. Sleep, super important. And for adults, we require 7 to 9 hours of sleep nightly. The sleep experts tell us that there perhaps is some variation in this, but truly we all need 7 to 9 hours of sleep most nights. Sometimes our conditions are such that, for instance, if someone is not in stable housing, it can make it very difficult to get this under times of stress. Often our sleep is disrupted, but the science is clear. This is what we need. For children, it's more than this. Teenagers and tweens, maybe 8 to 10 hours. For adults, when you get to about 10 hours of sleep, if you continue to sleep, you will experience being more fatigued. So at some point in time, if we're not having a health issue and we get to 9 up to about 10 hours of sleep, we really need to help ourselves get up. The little bullet points under this are that we want to be off all electronics at least 30 minutes before we go to bed. Longer is better. And then to engage in what we'll think of as a transition activity or getting the worries and concerns of the day out of our mind. And so we might read a book or a magazine, not on an e-reader, but for a little bit as a transition to rest. So we're not going to have the activities of the day and then just dive into our bed at the zero moment and be able to sleep because we haven't given our brain, our nervous system, and our bodies the signals that it's time to settle in for rest. So we want that transition activity, which we'll look at in another context as well. Then, and so I'll tell you a couple of other sleep hygiene guidelines. We don't want to go to bed hungry or just having eaten a full meal within about 2 hours. Exercise in the day can be helpful with our sleep at night, but we don't want to have vigorous exercise too close to the time we're going to sleep. The second of these 6 steps is eating. And so I'll just say also when we're distressed, the rhythms, this is brain function, but the rhythms of our body can be disrupted. Appetite can go up or it can go down, just like sleep. We may sleep more, we may sleep less. That can vary within the same individual. So actually under stressful conditions, or if we've been distressed, anxious, depressed, we really want to put some structure into our sleeping and eating and other of our, sometimes we call them the vegetative functions, but other of our body rhythms, rather than wait till we feel like doing it. So for eating, we want to eat at least 3 times a day, something with nutritional value, and not go long periods of time without eating. Number 3, and all of these are evidence-based on their own, but number 3 is movement, formerly known as exercise. And so movement, exercise is mood regulating and anxiety reducing. And so we want to aim for about 20 minutes or so of movement in the day. This could be walking to work. I have some people who walk around in their houses or apartments for 10 minutes twice a day. That counts. So the science, again, very clear on the mood regulating benefits of movement. Number 4, very powerful, is daily pleasant activities. And so we want to do something pleasant every single day and pay attention to it. It doesn't have to cost anything or take a long time. You don't have to go anywhere special for it. It could be I've got a hummingbird feeder, so watching the birds out the window, or taking a walk, or playing a game, listening to music. And when we are depressed, we get a symptom of depression. It's right there in our diagnostic formulary or set of symptoms for depression, something called anhedonia, which again is brain function, but a loss of interest or pleasure in things, often that were previously pleasant or interesting. And so it's a spiral of depression that looks sort of like a hurricane, that as we get more distressed or more depressed, often we have to keep the tasks and chores that are maybe we could think of as depleting, but then we have our enriching activities. And as our mood declines, we get that anhedonia and we lose interest in things that were interesting or pleasant before. And so those go away. And then we just have these depleting activities. So we don't want to wait until our intuition says, hey, this sounds pleasant again. So start again with your Wordle or whatever it is you're doing. We want to begin or continue to do something pleasant every single day and pay attention to it. Even if we're not experiencing it as pleasant, we want it to be also healthy and pleasant, but we don't want to wait until we're experiencing it as pleasant. We want to go ahead if we've dropped it out and put it back in, or continue if we've continued to do it. There are lists of hundreds of healthy and pleasant activities. If one needs them, you can find them online and other places. I've got some of those lists. If you need that, you can reach out to me. But if we're depressed enough or anxious enough for long enough, often we can't remember, or sometimes we can't remember what was pleasant. So just going to pick something that seems reasonable, pleasant, and healthy and begin to do it. Number 5 on our list of the 6 steps to emotional health is slow, deep, rhythmic breathing or focused breathing. We know that 5 minutes or more most days can change brain function and brain structure and have a positive effect on our DNA. We did a little focused breathing earlier, so I invited you, and anything you would do with me is invitational, but I invited you to take a couple of deep breaths. Let's do it again. Breathing in calm, breathing out tension. Exhale longer than the inhale. And there are many, 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 many ways to do focused breathing. There's some apps we're going to look at in a minute. Calm.com, Insight Timer. There's one called Bamboo for Spanish language. But anyone who's anxious at all should be doing some focused breathing. I think we would all fit in that category. And we could do it for a longer period of time, but even a couple of deep breaths can begin to reset our nervous system. And remember the zone of well-being, bring us back into that zone of well-being. And then number 6 on our 6 steps to emotional health is mindful thinking or mindfulness, learning again to have an awareness of what's going on in our mind. And as I mentioned earlier, just because we have a thought doesn't make it true or real or the time to think about it. So we might notice a thought and tell it that's not for right now. We don't have to battle with our thoughts or struggle with them or control them or our moods. Otherwise, that really takes us the wrong way. We want to have an awareness and the skills and tools to manage them, which we get better at. These are skills. So you can look at this more later, but the steps generally are to notice your thoughts. You can do the same thing with an emotion or a physical sensation, so very useful, and they're adaptations for chronic pain, but notice the thoughts, the sensations, then allow ourselves to let go. So we might notice thoughts as if they're clouds in the sky, and we see it, we let it drift on by without being hijacked by it. Then we may find a different focus, step 3. So it might be the coolness of the breath coming in the nose. It could be touching one hand with another. We did something else. We grounded and noticed our feet on the floor or wherever they were resting. That could be a focus point. And then step 4 is we might set aside a time with intention to come back and think about those things. So we're not trying to not at all think about difficult or unpleasant things, but we're trying to do it in an intentional, structured manner. And it's not always the right time to think about something. This is true also for grief and trauma. We'll look at those things. Here's a little graph or chart that one can use, and you wouldn't necessarily work on all of these in one moment, but you might pick one or two, like sleep or eating. And so this project is the Community Wellbeing Mentor Project. So imagine you're learning this for yourself and also to be able to communicate this to other people. So just imagine you've got maybe some of these blue cards, or you print this out and are giving this to someone, and you're conveying this to them. So regulating your sleep doesn't solve financial problems or relationship problems, but it does allow our body and our nervous system to come into the zone of well-being, allows our brain to come into a calm place, and then we're able to use our best judgment. And so teach you something called the handy model of the brain or the hand model of the brain. So imagine here's your hand, here your arm is your spinal cord, back in the back of our head here in our brain is the brainstem areas where a lot of our vegetative functions happen automatically, right? We don't have to think, do I need to breathe? No, that stuff just already happens. Here we have our frontal lobes or prefrontal cortex. And so here, this is good thinking, judgment. This is a simplification, but we teach this um, to preschoolers all the way up to law students and physicians or whomever, everyone. So here's our prefrontal cortex. Here, when we are highly anxious, or before I tell you that, deep in our brain is the limbic system and the amygdala. And this is where at least part of the fight or flight system happens and emotion regulation. And so if we are in a calm place, we might be online, able to use our best judgment and thinking. But as I'm getting activated or agitated or distressed, I might go offline. Sometimes this is called flipping our lid. And so here I'm highly activated. My nervous system may be in that fight or flight, trying to help me survive. But in that time, I'm working in a more automatic way. So these parts of our brain are activated, and really, unless there's a physical emergency right in front of us, we don't need all of that activation. So we can begin to resettle and come back into this place of calm in our body, in our mind, by beginning to have those slow, deep, rhythmic breaths or disengage from the round and round anxious thought, which again, unless we're reacting to a physical emergency right in front of us, we don't need that necessarily in that moment. So the hand or handy model of the brain. And so here are some internet mindfulness resources. When I'm recording this, these were up to date, but things, as we know, technology changes, content changes. Here is a mindful awareness practice from me at the Department of Psychiatry at University of Florida, which also has a YouTube page, and practices as short as 2 minutes. I call them resilience resets, and other guided practices, and there are other people besides me on there. Here are some websites. I'll point out particularly Black Zen, which is more specifically for communities that are Black and Brown. Then we have a whole bunch of apps here. My favorite's Insight Timer, which has more than 200,000 free mindfulness practices. It has live yoga, etc., which it's free. You can pay something if you want, but you don't have to. I love Virtual Hope Box, which was developed by the VA, and it has a lot of evidence-based pieces in it to help us manage what's going on if we're having great distress. A lot of people really love calm.com and Headspace. Headspace is really appealing often for young adults. Those have a paywall, so after about 7 days, you have to pay something to keep using them, but they do have some good lessons and good information at the beginning. So you can use that for a little bit. And some people purchase it and want to continue. Bamboo is Spanish language. Grateful is a way, we're going to talk about gratitude in a moment, but grateful is a place where you can record things you're grateful for. And I've already used the words mindfulness several times today. And so here is a definition of mindfulness by John Kabat-Zinn, who is one of the people who brought mindfulness practices to the US decades ago. And so this definition says mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention in this particular way, on purpose, so that's with intention, to the present moment, and without judgment. And the non-judgment is of our thoughts. I shouldn't be thinking that. I shouldn't be feeling this. It might be of ourselves, of others, but it's seeing those things from a perspective. And so sometimes as we develop this, we develop something called metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. So seeing a thought as if it's a cloud in the sky. and letting it go on by. And the thoughts we're most likely to have are the ones we have had, their habits, as we talked about earlier. So we can begin to make change in that, but that's requires work and practice, but very important. Let me also say that the Insight Timer app has playlists of different mindfulness practices. So there's some there for anxiety, and there's some there for pain, chronic pain as well, and many others. So here's a daily pleasant and challenging activity form. And so in our 6 steps to emotional health, one of those was do something pleasant every single day and pay attention to it. Science super clear on this. Um, and here we might just say, hey, let's do that. And I had that anhedonia, so I had that spiral, and I dropped the pleasant things. And I'm listening to this training, so I decide I'm going to put my walks back in or whatever it is, and that's great. For most of us, having a form where we can write this down makes it more likely we're going to do something. So here we have a form, and we might plan a pleasant activity. This is how you use it. Plan a pleasant activity for every day. Remember, it doesn't have to cost anything or take a long time. You don't have to go anywhere special for it. So I'm just planning, let's say I'm going to read every day. That's great. We want some variety. So I'm also going to take a walk in here, some places. We are not doing this to grade ourselves on, did I do the thing I planned? No. Really, this is because remember, as we have that spiral of depression or distress, things don't seem pleasant anymore. And so sometimes if we're distressed long enough, we can't think of anything. So we make this list so we can refer back to it. Then here's the pleasant activity I actually did. And sometimes when we're starting out after periods of distress, it can be hard to do a pleasant activity every day, but we want to try to weave those into our lives. Then, did I pay attention to that activity while I did it? Was I doing yard work, thinking, or perhaps talking to someone else about all this distressing things happening in my life, the news, etc.? I might still get benefit from those activities, but we really want to try to bring our minds to present moment as much as we can. So I'm looking out the window at the hummingbird feeder. I am playing a game with my grandchild or whatever it is. Then the science also tells us very clearly that doing something a little bit hard every day is really important or can be very helpful in managing mood and anxiety. This might be playing a game on your phone or doing a word search. That's sort of beginning level of things because our energy is down if we're distressed long enough. So I might find a word search somewhere and work on that for a little bit. We're not trying to get the hardest activity to do to say, look, I can't do anything. No, we just want to do something a little bit hard and pay attention to it. Very important. And again, imagine you're a community well-being mentor and you're learning this to help yourself, but you're also going to share this with other people. Everything I've shown you, excuse me, I have used in my clinical practice. I have developed some of these others we've adapted from other sources, but I've used them many times across various settings. So here's a daily gratitude diary, and this is just a little version of this, but science is clear that thinking of, in this case, we've given room for 3 to 5 things that we're grateful for every day is really useful for managing mood and anxiety. There seems to be something about writing it down or recording it, perhaps on that Grateful app, but this is one version. You could do this anywhere. You could do it on scraps of paper. It doesn't really matter. But we pause to think of things that we're grateful for. Part of how this works is we look for a variety of things. So often the first day or two, we're thinking of the big ticket items, like I'm thankful for my health and my family and things such as that. Day 2, I want to think of different things than the ones I put on day 1. And I want to keep going as long as I can with different things. And often we have a lot of things around us that we enjoy or have meaning for us, but we wouldn't put them on the first few days. So I wear wool socks all year, for instance, because my feet get cold and I really appreciate them. That's not on my first couple of days, but it might be day 3 or 4 really for me. But daily gratitude or gratitude practices resensitize us. They bring awareness back to things that when we had that spiral of distress, we forgot all those things in our lives that are good, and we get a tunnel vision where we're really focused on the negative things. That's also brain function. But we forget about the things that are in our lives. And so this kind of practice we get reoriented back toward, or we remember the things that are meaningful and important and pleasant in our lives, and lots of different ways to do that. Here are some safety resources. I'm recording this in Alachua County, Florida. And so this is relevant. The top part's relevant for my context. And so Alachua County Crisis Center, our local community behavioral health agency, one of our psychiatric hospitals, the one at the University of Florida that I've been associated with. Now, good for us, lucky for us, we have a national suicide and crisis lifeline, 988, and they will patch you through to the resources that you need. There's also something called the crisis text line that you can text to. You text home to 741-741, evidence-based resource there. And then wherever you are, I encourage you to research and add the local crisis behavioral health and other resources that are here with their phone numbers. In Alachua County, one of the places you can get free ongoing counseling is at our Alachua County Crisis Center. So that's really important to know. So if in your role as a community well-being mentor, I really encourage you to look for those free behavioral health resources, those crisis resources. We're not training here to be social workers or mental health professionals, but um, we are wanting to raise awareness of tools and skills and also resources. So that would be important if you're talking to someone and say, here, these are the 6 steps to managing mood and anxiety. And someone says, well, I've had a lot of distress. You might say, well, here's a free counseling resource. Or do you have the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline? All right. So now let's get to the extras. And if you are watching this in segments, I might say this is a good place to pause for just a little bit, to pause the recording, take a break. But we're gonna cover some of these extras, which may come in handy. And I've had plenty of people come back to me. I forgot to mention that in the last 2 years, I've trained almost 500 people to be community well-being mentors, some of them in in-person trainings and others in online trainings such as this. And I got asked a number of times, do I have an online version? So here we are today. But I've had a lot of people come back and say that nightmare protocol you gave, I've several people have asked me for something about that, and I had something. Or I've had people say, oh, the trauma recovery model has been so useful to just understand the roadmap for recovery from trauma. So here are the extras. We have already done some focus breathing and grounding practices, but we may find people, or perhaps it's ourselves, that don't have a number of coping skill kind of things. And so this is, I called it PALMS, but it's practicing and learning mindfulness skills, a set of mindful awareness skills, some of which are focus breathing, some of which are grounding, and this 5-4-3-2-1 grounding practice is also one. And there's an additional one on the next slide. But focus breathing, there's many, many, many focus breathing practices. You can find them lots of places. We did the first one, breathing in calm and breathing out tension. I'm sure I've said it enough times that you'll have the sense that the exhales being longer than the inhales is important to stimulate the soothing part of the nervous system. You can count breaths. Inhale 1, exhale 1. Breathing to music is often a favorite. It's one of my favorites, and you might breathe slow, deep, and rhythmically with the exhales longer from the beginning to the end of a song. Teenagers, children, a lot of people who wouldn't be open to some other kind of mindfulness practices, um, often like this one. They can pick out the song, their favorite song, whatever it is. We're not breathing necessarily to the rhythm of the song, but we're using it a little bit as a timer. And then breathing in and out using words, which we have done. We did calm and tension, but you might use relax or here and now. Here are grounding practices. Here's our round and round thinking mind, hijacking us or sweeping us away. And we might bring awareness into the body. Remember, how do we know how we feel? Those 4 areas of awareness. Here, we're going to bring our mind out of the thoughts or perhaps the awareness or focus on the physical pain into something else. The 5 senses are really helpful for this. I believe that the breath, grounding, and the 5 senses are some of our most powerful tools, and we have what we need with us at all times to use those. But so grounding, bringing awareness to the feet on the floor or wherever they're resting or in space. We've done that. Notice number 2, notice the surfaces supporting the body. So if you're sitting, it might be at the upper legs or hips. If you're standing, at the feet. Might be armrests, the back of a chair. This 5-4-3-2-1 grounding practice, which many of you may have heard of, goes through those 5 main senses. You could do them in any order, so I think that's fine. But you're going to go through awareness using each of the 5 senses, those 5 main senses. So you might describe 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, and that could be the breath at your nose or the coolness of one hand touching the other, whatever that may be. 3 things you hear, and that might be inside your own body as well. 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And if you're not tasting something, or I often do these in another order, whatever order I think of. If I forget one of them, the last one you can use also. Name 1 good thing about yourself. But 5-4-3-2-1 grounding, we're taking ourselves out of the worry mind, the round and round thinking, and bringing ourselves back into this moment as best we can without judgment. So let's look at another grounding practice that's mentioned up here, peace in the palm of my hand. I love this, adapted from the art of social work. So we have our hands with us for the most part. And so this idea is also thought of as resourcing. So we're going to carry a positive memory, a thought of someone who represents or brings us calm or strength or whatever we need. We're going to carry it with us in the palm of our hand. We're going to remember it with all 5 senses to help it feel more real. So let's say calm, and I'm in Florida, so often people think of the beach. And so what might I touch? The sand under my feet or the sun on my skin? What might I taste? The salt spray or ice cream at a nearby shop that we might go to. Smell a salt spray as well. Hear the birds, the waves, and what might you see? And so you can go up and down each finger as you describe that. You might draw circles on your hand. If you were using this as a printout, you might print it out. And I've had people draw or write the word here and go up and down. Or even write on, if you're using it as a handout, what are the sensations that you might find for each of those. But you might just remember it with your hand, and then being somewhere you might touch your hand and remember the beach and notice the calm coming in your body. This, as I mentioned, we could look for something we need like safety or stability and strength. And you might think of a place, a person, real or fictional, etc., that represents strength. For little kids, they might think of superheroes, and so they might think of whoever their superhero of choice is and go up and down with something that's relevant to them. But then the idea is we take it with us in the palm of our hand to make it feel more real. Sometimes people even put that then on their heart, on their bodies, to imagine that that is, they're sort of transmitting that to themselves. All right. Here are some positive conflict resolution guidelines. And so I developed these over time, over the years. And so the idea here is to set some limits or boundaries around our conversations that are about sensitive or conflictual topics. And so the overall idea is if here's a problem and here's the solution, we want to be going relatively directly from the problem to the solution. If voices rise, tempers flare, names are being called, all those sorts of things. We're talking about every other thing that's happened. We're no longer headed to the solution. We might get there, but the often a lot of damage has been done along the way. And so if we can talk about concerns, issues, problems, disagreements in a way that has these sorts of structures around them, it can be helpful. So first is we only want to talk about a problem when everyone's calm and rational, because remember that flip your lid. So if I'm offline in my frontal lobes, I'm more likely to be disinhibited and say things that I probably should not say in that moment. Um, so we want everyone involved to be calm and rational. Then there's certain times that are the right time, certain times that are the wrong time to talk about a problem. So my line in the day is dinner time or when the sun goes down. After that is not the best time to talk about a problem. We are fatigued, more likely to be disinhibited. We're also going and then say or do something perhaps that would be best left unsaid in that moment. And also, we're going to try to rest in the near future, and this may disrupt our sleep. So, other times that are the wrong time, if anyone's had any alcohol or substance on board, that's also disinhibiting, and so we don't want to have the conversation then, even if it's just a little bit of alcohol or whatever it may be. Also, if people are tired or hungry, that's sort of classic hangry, also disinhibited, not the best time to talk about a problem. We want to set some time limits around this, so 30 minutes or less. If we've talked about it and talked about it 5 minutes or just a minute or two is okay, but we don't want to go on and on and on because after about 15 or 20 minutes, usually we're re-saying, repeating what we've already said, maybe saying it louder or whatever other way, hoping the person may now see our point of view. And really important things, a couple of other really important things are that if we're going, if voices rise, tempers flare, et cetera, if this isn't going well, we want to stop the conversation. And we don't want to say, you're getting so whatever it is, so worked up that I'm not going to talk to you now. But we might just say, this isn't going well. We need to set this aside and come back to it. When we're offline, often we feel like I'm not going to let this go right now, but really, in many, many situations, it's better if we can come to the table when everyone's calm and rational. So we want to set aside a time. We don't necessarily have to do it in that moment to set the time, but we definitely want to come back to whatever was the concern at a time when people all involved are calm and rational. And you can use these guidelines with parents and children or partners or any two or more people. We know that people are describing loneliness as epidemic right now, coming especially out of the COVID pandemic. We know that it's really important and healthy for us to be connected to others in a meaningful way. And so this is a social network checkup, and it's sort of like your smoke detector or something like that. It's really useful for us, let's say once a year or whatever period of time you want to to reflect upon who are the people that I have significant and meaningful relationships in my life, who are the people I have those relationships with. So here you'd think about it, you'd record them. How often do I see or communicate with them? How healthy is this relationship? Is there some tending that needs to be done in that relationship to keep it healthy? Little tiny words up here say that sometimes unhealthy relationships um, need boundaries set or need to be ended. So sometimes tending means ending. And so if I only am able to list, one or two and I'm an introvert, maybe that's okay. We all need at least a couple of people. If I can't put anybody here, then there's some work to do. And we don't instantly make relationships, but that can be something we have intention about and begin the work of um, looking for and putting ourselves in places where we might interact with people that we share interests with, for instance. This is a nightmare reprocessing protocol or framework. And so for anyone who's having nightmares, especially of a recurrent kind, so a theme that repeats, this can be very useful. And there's some science to show us this can be helpful. So you'd write the nightmare story down. Then what's the negative assumption the dream says about you? So if it's a nightmare, the dream says something negative. Otherwise, it's just a dream. And so it would be something like, I'm not safe, or I'm worthless, or I'm incompetent, or something like that. So it says something negative about you. We want to look toward the positive. So, what would I prefer to think about myself instead? And so, looking for a positive alternative of the ones I mentioned, perhaps I'm safe, I'm worthy, I'm competent, whatever it might be. Then we write a different ending to the dream that allows us to wake up in a peaceful state. And then here's just a little guideline for practicing that dream with the better ending and the positive affirmation. So this says 3 weeks. There's some flexibility in that, but once in the morning, once in the evening, not the last thing before you go to bed, but you're going to do some guided imagery, some relaxation. Then we replay the dream in our mind with the new ending and think of the positive affirmation, then a little more guided imagery, kind of like an Oreo or something. We do the relaxation, then the new dream and the positive, and then some relaxation. And this can help disrupt a cycle of nightmares. This is really important. 3-stage trauma recovery model. And I'm not giving this to you. This isn't a trauma treatment. It just is an explanation that there can be recovery or integration or reintegration after trauma. The same is true for grief. That there can be that can always be available for us, but it should happen and would happen in a sort of structured manner. So if you're talking to someone in your role as a community well-being mentor and they've had something traumatic happen, they're going to go talk to a professional, then they might expect or ask even that this is the pathway, this is the roadmap for the treatment that they're going to do. And this is from some classic work. And so we don't come right into conversation and discussion about the trauma memory. There's some work to be done first in trauma treatment, which has been one of my areas of expertise for many years. Really, what we're doing is learning how to relate to the thoughts or memories about what we've experienced in a different way, because typically and hopefully whatever that traumatic thing is not happening anymore right now. And if it is, we need to address that. But this is something that has happened. And so what we're reacting to is a memory, a thought, etc., an image. That's part of a memory. And so we want to help the brain understand and the nervous system understand that we don't need to be in fight or flight, that survival response if the thing is not happening right now. Trauma treatment's not going to erase or a memory. It's not going to make the thing that happened better than it was, but it can help change our relationship to those thoughts and help us be more available for our life right now. So there are 3 stages in this trauma recovery model, and I find it can be and has been so helpful for people to understand this at the beginning of some trauma work. So if you're talking to someone as a community well-being mentor, to help them understand that there is recovery or at least integration available. And that is so relieving for many people. We know that with trauma, if we look at resilience, that the science tells us that about 60% of people who have experienced trauma are going to bounce back, be resilient on their own within a reasonable period of time. Um, then of the remaining 30+% of people, let's say 2/3 are going to bounce back on their own in this sort of expected period of time. The other third, some portion of them will take longer on their own, but then they'll come to resilience. And then the last group really have difficulty for a long time, and professional help is good for any of the groups, but that group in particular. So what does the pathway look like to recovery? And so first, it's understanding the impact of trauma. How is it impacting me in my body and my mind and my behavior? Um, so understanding the effects of trauma, then finding safety and stability. So the safety is in the classic sense of around me, but it's also in my own thoughts, in my own reactivity, in my own behavior. I'm hurting myself, that's not safe. And then finding stability is developing tools and skills, coping skills and tools to self-soothe and regulate ourselves. We've done some of that, right? Those focus breathing and mindfulness tools, the grounding practices, the peace in the palm of my hand. Those are very powerful tools that could help someone. Then coming to terms with the trauma memory. Um, you can think of this whole model as being a little bit like a cafeteria or a restaurant like Chipotle or something, where we're going to go in, a number of people are going to go in and make different choices. So different things may happen here, different treatments, but we're still going to end up at the same place of recovery at the end. So the second stage, coming to terms with the trauma memory, can involve a number of evidence-based treatments for trauma. The original one, or the first one that was studied by science, is called prolonged exposure. There's something called cognitive processing therapy. There are a couple that are specifically for children, like trauma-focused CBT or cognitive behavior therapy. It follows the same model. And EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is the only trauma treatment that I offer at this time. I find it to be the most efficient, most effective, and the least suffering of the ones that I'm trained in, which is a number. And then we want to come back into our lives in a healthier way. We may have made all sorts of adjustments in our lives to avoid things that were triggering, and we may be more and more constricted. And so we want to rebuild a healthy life together. There's also mention here about yoga and other kinds of mindful movement, especially if we've had harm done to us in our bodies. We may be disengaged from our bodies, so learning how to be in ourselves, in our bodies in a healthy way can be very healing. And really the last of the tools and skills is this one, structured processing, or really it's a guide for how much to think about things. So let's look at the dimension at the bottom. I called it Dr. Lewis's dimension of processing. That's really a joke to myself, but how much to think about things. And so on this side over here, our answer is thinking about it all the time. The other extreme is trying not to think about it at all, that we could think of as repression or denial. That can be the right answer right after something has happened, right after a loss, or think of it like shock, where we're overwhelmed. And so that may be the right answer for a short period, but it's not the sustainable answer for the long time, for the long haul. That is like throwing a boomerang out, and eventually it will return because it takes a lot of energy to repress or push that door closed. Um, and that's really why, most of the trauma treatments are about turning toward those thoughts and memories. I didn't say that earlier, but it is. They are turning toward the trauma memories because it takes so much energy to slam that door shut. Um, so the one extreme, not thinking about it at all, then the other, thinking about it all the time. That's like we've got a wound we're just scraping away at. Sometimes people think, if it's still bothering me, it's unprocessed. So I need to just keep talking about it and talking about it. And I don't think that doesn't bear up. So you see here this triangle. So perhaps we're not thinking about whatever it is, grief, trauma, stressor, annoyance all of the time, but we're allowing ourselves at work or with family or something like that to let go of it. But then as soon as we walk out the door from work, school, etc., there it is. And it's in our personal time all up in here. This star is really our sweet spot where we want to think about whatever it is in a way that has a beginning and an end on any given occasion. And so here's some guidelines for how to do this. This is a skill just like everything else we've talked about here. So we're managing our thoughts where we are not controlling them. Control is an illusion. And so we're managing them. And so remember how we're going to set aside a time to talk about issues and problems with someone. I said not at bedtime, but daytime's good for that. We might we might set a time to think about whatever is the concern, grief, trauma. We might set aside a length of time. I usually say no more than 30 minutes, but it could be 5 minutes, 2 minutes. It could be no minutes at this point if you've thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. We're going to set aside a time and we're going to try to think about whatever it is in a way that has a beginning and an end on any given occasion. So we're going to focus on whatever it is for the set amount of time, or we might set a time. That's one of the bullet points here. We might say, Wednesday from 10 to 10:30, or if it's something that's recently happened, maybe I've got several times in the week. I'm going to think about it in this way that has a beginning and an end. And at the end of that time, it's like I'm going to take the worries and concerns from my heart and mind and put them in this box on the shelf and come back to them later. So we're not sticking it in there, putting that stuff in there, locking it up like that boomerang sort of thing. Like, I'm never going to think about this again because that does not work in the long run. But we're putting it in there just like we read before we go to bed or look at a magazine or listen to quiet music. We're going to follow our think about this issue, stress or problem, grief, in this structured way. I'm going to follow it by a transition activity that brings me to present moment. So I've thought about it, and I'm going to put the thoughts and feelings in the box on the shelf and engage in a transition activity to bring me back into present moment. So that I might play a word search again. So I notice if I'm not paying attention, or listen to music, or cook something, or it'll be whatever works for you. Listen to a book, something bringing us back to present moment. Here's that transition activity. And then because I thought about it on purpose, it may, even though I've engaged in the transition activity, it may come in my mind. And so here are those issues or concerns. And so I might notice it. We don't have to get alarmed, but I might notice it and say, that's not for right now. Take a deep breath. Imagine letting go of those thoughts. We've looked at that a little bit, letting go of those thoughts like they're a cloud in the sky, let them drift on through, come back to the breath at the nose, etc. But I might tell myself that's not for right now. And then setting aside a time. We've already talked about that. Sometimes are not the right time to do this. And again, my line in the day might be dinner time or when the sun goes down, not after that, because we're going to try to rest and we're more vulnerable to emotionality. So here are the guidelines for how much to think about things. In my training in person, you have this notes page. But so I've given you here many tools and skills, some basics, some extras that I hope can be useful for you. You have my contact information on a prior slide, so feel free to reach out to me. The University of Florida Mobile Outreach Clinic, at this point in time, at least when I'm recording this, is offering this training free of charge. We've gotten some funding to support its work. So it can be online or in person if it's not too far away from Gainesville, Florida, which is where I am. But it could be online. So if you're part of a community group or an agency, etc., that you feel like this training would be really useful for, and I could imagine many, many applications, community group, your neighborhood association, etc. Feel free to reach out to me at the email that was up here previously, carolLewis@ufl.edu, or text me or call me. Email's probably best, most effective. And we can talk about rolling this out. Or if you have questions for me, or you want to get the digital files for everything I've just shown you, we're part of the sharing economy, and I'm happy to share those things with you. All right. Thank you so much for participating in this community well-being mentor training. And I'd love to have feedback from you. We're constantly evolving the project to being more effective and efficient. Thank you so much. Again, Carol Lewis, University of Florida Mobile Outreach Clinic.